Well, hello. Welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow. And in this episode, we are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike. She's a rock and roll cultural historian and author who's recently written critically acclaimed and best-selling books, You Are Beautiful and You Are Alone, the biography of Nico, and Being Britney, Pieces of a Modern Icon. We wanted to talk to her about the pressures on music stars, including burnout, overwork, and various social media stresses, using Britney as a central example, but also leaning on Jen's past work and experience in the music business. Now, Music Ally Focus provides, as you know, an analysis-rich and contextual guide to the music business, analysing one meaningful music story at a time. And this podcast is going to be quick. Okay, not this time, because as you'll hear, Jen and I go back a little bit, and as such, our conversation just kept on going and kept on turning up more and more interesting topics, as well as some eye-opening revelations involving a clown. Anyway, it'll last about the same amount of time as Alfredo Hernandez could hypothetically eat 500 jalapeno peppers. Alfredo ate 16 in 1 minute on the 17th of September 2006, and one presumes that the 18th of September 2006 must have been a painful day for him. Now, talking of spicy histories, Jen has a rich music industry heritage, having worked in senior positions at Interscope and working with artists like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, Dr. Dre, Gwen Stefani, U2 and Eminem, amongst others, before she left to start a brand new life in the UK. Now, amongst other things, she's co-founder of Moving the Needle, a non-profit organisation that supports women in the UK music industry. And she spoke to me about the societal and music industry pressures on pop stars and musicians, and how we can create a better space for them to produce the music we love. Let's go over with the interview with Jen now.
Okay, I'm palpitating with excitement to welcome Dr. Jennifer Otter Bickerdike to the podcast. Jen, great to see you.
Hello, you gorgeous creature. I just adore you to tiny bits and pieces. It's disgusting.
This is why I invited you, really, just for the ego massage. Now, before we sort of get into the topic around your burnout, overwork, how artists are placed under pressure and things like that, can you give us a quick sort of précis of your music industry background and how that led to you writing books, and sort of the central example here being the one on Britney?
Yeah, so basically, I went to Olympic trials for swimming when I was 16, which the reason I bring that up is because in America, where I'm from in California, my goal was to be on the cover of a cereal box. I don't think I've ever told you that before. That was the goal.
No, that's a new one.
That was that was the goal. And I came in fourth for Olympic trials. I take the top 3 people and for my event. So after that, I was just kind of like, I was so disappointed because my entire life had been wrapped up in swimming. And I started putting on shows in my hometown of Santa Cruz at 16. And this is health and safety has just ruined everything. You know what I mean? Let's call a spade a spade. Like, I look back at that and I'm like, hold on a second. I was 16 years old, shoulder tapping for kegs of beer. Like, people would buy kegs of beer and like, I looked 16. I'm really tall, as you know, but like I looked 16 and like people would still buy kegs of beer, drive them over to like random people's homes or like random venues. And then bands would come up and play. So we had like No Doubt, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Sublime, Ska was like a big thing. I don't know if all these bands had like translate to the European audience, but bands like Skank and Pickle. So that was
two-tone sort of influence that was in the bands around that time.
Yeah, like very much like to me, like, I mean, I still am reeling that Terry Hall just passed away. Like he was someone that was a friend and definitely a huge inspiration to me. And I love him and can't believe he's gone. But to so many of us, he was a huge influence and inspiration. So that was like the early days. And then I went to the University of California, and it was hilarious because it's very, very competitive university. It'd be kind of like going to a Cambridge or Oxford here. And I remember going to the career center and being like, I want to work in the music industry. And it's like I said to them, Joe, I want to have a crack cocaine lab in my dorm room.
Right.
No help whatsoever.
No help at all.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the next step was to get the crack cocaine lab up and running, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They called me New Jack Jen. Sorry, only people who are vintage will know that one. So basically then, sorry, it's probably too much detail, but then I literally got a notebook and I just wrote in it everything I could think about that was like, okay, what do I know at age 18 that has to do with the music industry? And of course, this is all pre-internet. So it was like the local radio station, my school newspaper, and I just started getting involved in like all of them. And the reason I bring up the swimming is because, you know, I had to pay for my own university education. So I was working full-time, interning full-time, and going to school full-time. And I think being an athlete early on kind of trained me to just go, like, never give up and just go for broke with everything. So by the time I was 25, I was the head of marketing for Interscope, Geffen, A&M, which at the time was the biggest record label in the world.
And what year was that roughly?
This was like 2000, 2001-ish.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, that means working with everyone from Sting, U2, no doubt Gwen Stefani, to fantastic artists like Limp Bizkit, who I'm sure you love and adore.
Huge fan of Fred Durst's
huge fan.
work. Yeah.
I literally got in a fist fight with him, or nearly one. It's funny because probably not unlike yourself, I forget, it's like my brain is like a 7-Eleven CCTV, like too much information can't compute, and something will
just records over and over itself.
Yeah, it's like this is just the information I need access to that day. So like something will spark a memory, and I'll be something like, oh yeah, I did meet so and so, or oh yeah, I did accidentally do cocaine when I was 27 with that celebrity, or whatever it is.
Sorry, the word accidentally is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Do you
want to incriminate yourself further?
I'm just trying to keep on Twitter trend right now.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Anyway, so I did that, and then I left that to go help Gwen Stefani start Lamb, her handbag line, which now is like a massive, huge thing in America. And then I left that to go work at Facebook. And then one of my friends was murdered. And it completely freaked me out. And I was just like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And I sold everything I owned. I'd always wanted to live in England, and I moved here. And the only way at my age at that point I could move to England was to get a PhD. So I moved here, enrolled at Goldsmiths, got a PhD, which was on Joy Division. Did that. And then my next kind of thing I really wanted to do was to start writing. And so at the ripe old age of 42, I started writing, and I did one book on an independent publisher called Why Vinyl Matters, which was a bestseller. And then I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do a biography on Nico, which has won quite a bit of critical acclaim. In fact, John Cale just recently has said that he thinks it's an amazing book, which is such high praise. And then that brings me to Britney. So I just did another #1 best-selling book on Britney Spears.
Yes, and excellent reviews for that as well. And it came out at just the right time. I dread to think what the pressure your publisher was putting you under around the time when she was emerging from her sort of complicated relationship with her family, and you had a publishing deadline coming up. So congratulations for getting through that. But that book, which I will link to below the podcast, just as a little quote here is, quote, the account of a talented, troubled and talked about modern icon who's managed to grow a multi-million-dollar empire despite numerous outside forces trying to destroy her from every angle. What I wanted to talk to you about was, and why I asked you for your background, a topic which is coming up increasingly now within the music industry, driven mainly by artists becoming more outspoken. And they're saying, I'm under too much pressure. I can't deal with this. I'm taking time off. And that is quite a new paradigm. It's not that artists are under pressure for the first time. It's just that they are taking control and talking about it. Before we get to that, of course, Britney is perhaps a very, very extreme example of that. So can you tell us a sort of brief overview of what the book is about and the angle you sort of approach her from in that?
Yeah, I mean, with Britney, the way I did the Britney book is there's never been a book about Britney that is academic, thoughtful, and really a critical account of the phenomena that is Britney Spears. And the book came about because I'd finished Nico, and I was in between the final touches on Nico. My publisher came to me and said, what other woman has kind of needs to be recontextualized? And there's so many kind of like outline figures that you could go with. But I thought, you know what? Britney Spears like really fascinates me because she's so mainstream. You can't get much more mainstream than Britney, but then at the same time, she is such an outlier and she's such a symbol for so many people. of an outsider. And those things are just so contrasting that I wanted to dig into that. So the way that I did the book is it was coming out around Britney's 40th birthday. So I did it as 40 chapters, and a lot of the chapters are incidents that are well known in the press, like her shaving her head or her talking the paparazzi with the umbrella. But we look at it from other angles, and we also look at it. I don't know why I said we. I look at
Look, you can refer to yourself however you like.
That's right. Yeah. I look at it from also how Britney is really a reflection to popular culture and what's going on in popular culture. And one thing as an American living as an expat, I find terrifying is that the way that in a lot of ways, the rest of the world looks to America for its cues in terms of what's the next thing, what's the future, what's acceptable, and what's aspirational. And that to me is really terrifying in a lot of ways. And this book shows that. And I think the way we've treated Britney is a great example of what not to do to celebrities.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because actually, when I think about it, I don't know anything about her. You know, she's a complete artifice. She may as well be a virtual pop star in some respects, because I don't know anything about her life other than some scant details. I don't know anything about her personality other than sort of salacious tabloid-driven stuff. And I don't know what she thinks or wants or cares about. You know, she is just this, as you say, an icon in the sort of dictionary definition, in that she is sort of totemic and is made into this product. And of course, we're seeing now the sort of repercussions of that. Of everything that's playing out at the moment is the repercussions of turning a human being into a product to the very nth degree. Britney, you know, we're talking here about the pressures that artists face. Britney is, let's start with this extreme example then. She's a very obvious example of someone who's weathered and survived extreme pressure. What were the sort of examples of the pressures that, I'm going to say the music industry in inverted commas, but the people around her who were the music industry were putting on her, and what impact did it have?
You know what? I think one of the things that I think is fascinating is I think to say the music industry, I think that is an unfair thing to say. I'm not attacking you for that. I think that's an easy kind of catch-all to use, but I think it's more the larger framing of society and the way that we speak to people and women in general. That is more what we're looking at, and not questioning or having concern. And what I mean by that, there's some and the double standard. And I think for me, I was coming right off of writing about Nico, where the double standard was so extreme in terms of the way that Lou Reed, who it was an evil, horrible person to Nico, jealous of her, like treated her like absolute garbage, the way he's been canonized as this iconic, heroic legend compared to the way she's been mythologized as a slutty junkie. I just found it horrifying. So I went literally, Joe, I went directly from training in final drafts of Nico as I was writing Britney. So I went from that. So when I'm looking at the things happen to Britney, like things like when she's a teenager being asked by a man who's like 50 or 60 about her, if she has breast implants or not, the way that Justin Timberlake is going on the radio and saying like that he like, you know, that he was the one that Britney lost her virginity with, just the way that she was kind of seen as being mad when she probably was having postpartum depression, all those kind of things. Like you didn't see Britney going on the radio and being like, yeah, I tapped that ass ooh, to Justin. You know what I mean? And if she had, that's the thing. It's like,
she would have been well within her rights to have done, right? I
think that would have been hot if she would have done that. I would have loved that if she would have done that. But, and also the way that the thing that I also found fascinating, and you don't see this that much in Britain, but in America has this horrible hypocrisy and obsession with sex, but also with being a good Christian and like this kind of Protestant.
This is the Madonna whore complex.
Exactly. The Madonna whore complex. So, they loved it when she was coming up and she was this innocent girl saying that she had her promise ring and she was having sex till she was married. But and yet, you know, and they didn't like the idea, like the Britney video for not Oops, I Did It Again.
Hit Me Baby One More Time.
Yeah, Hit Me Baby One More Time, where she's wearing like the Catholic schoolgirl outfit. It's like, you know, you don't want to think about this because you have a daughter, but I remember being in high school and like always trying to make the skirt shorter, always trying to show off more boob. Like that's what a kid does. Like you're pushing those boundaries, you know? And the thing is that people said that those videos were made for adults. I think that maybe they were, but she was the one that wanted to make those decisions. And it was, and like, oh, she's a Lolita. A 16-year-old doesn't even know what a Lolita is, you know? So like you're making these judgments on a kid with adult eyes. And that's the issue. Am I making sense? I'm kind of,
no, that does make sense because it's good context in the sense that all this is happening in a wider societal sense. It was clear that she was commoditized from the very beginning and made into this sex object that was also family friendly, you know, and that's weird, you know, when we look at it now, but it was normalized really quick, then.
Yeah, one of the things that was like, it's funny because, you know, I've said this in interviews before, you know, I was working in the music business at this time of this whole thing. You know, I saw Britney, I met Britney, and I was just like, girl, get it together. Like, you're a disaster on legs. Please, sis, you know. But you're looking at this going, when I look back in the context, she comes out like with that first record at the year where more people die of AIDS in America than any other year, the year that Britney Spears comes out. And I wasn't living in Britain, so I don't know how it was. I was living in San Francisco, and growing up in the Bay Area, which was kind of one of the epicenters of the AIDS, definitely the epidemic, but also the fear and the hysteria. I remember being a kid and going into San Francisco and being scared to touch anything because I would get AIDS. I remember checking out books from the library and like wearing plastic bags on my hand to turn the pages because I was afraid I was going to get AIDS. So Britney is this product that's safe, you know, in this care of AIDS. She's a product you can give your kids that's safe. And that's, I think, like you're talking about the larger context. These are all things that I don't think people think about, or I mean, I didn't think about it until I was writing this book. And then I was like, oh my God, like no wonder we grasped onto this. No wonder she was so popular. Like, it was like a salve to this terror that we'd had for so long.
And she was also a product of the pre-internet media, where these big decisions could be made by big companies that would impact literally hundreds of millions of people around, well, even just the US, but more around the world. You know, and there was a lot of control, and of course, control is one of those things which crops up time and time again with Britney. But I mean, like you say, we've started with the wider societal picture there, but if we're talking, you know, we have a music industry audience, and we're sort of talking about what the music industry or people directly involved with her in the sort of business side, in her, you know, artistic life, business life, could have done differently to protect her from as a human at the center of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think at that time, like you were saying, we definitely still, I don't care what anyone says, I think we still really fetishize the idea of the miserable artist. Regardless what anyone says, we love that. Why else is everybody walking around with a Nirvana t-shirt on? We love that. That's a thing that plays out.
You wrote the book on Joy Division, so
that's right. I did. Yeah. Oh my God, it was so hilarious. I know way too much about Joy Division. I was doing a Zoom yesterday, and the guy had wallpaper in the background that was exactly the wallpaper Ian Curtis had in his house from Joy Division. I'm like, I just don't do too much.
How do you even know that?
Child, I know everything about Joy Division. Okay. The point being is that we still love that idea. And if you say you don't, then that's not true. It's just a lie. Like, we love the miserable, suffering artist. It's like, without pain, the pain fuels the art. Or at least we love that idea. And so back to Britney, I think if we think about that time period, there was not the open conversation about, you know, I'm feeling stressed out, I'm tired, my mental health isn't good. And there also was not that idea of balance, I think, you know, like working in the music industry. I mean, it was literally, you know, party at nighttime and just try to recover during the day. Like, that's how it was. And there was not any talk of therapy or green juice or any of that kind of stuff at all. So I don't know.
The first person to mention green juice on the podcast. I'm happy to say.
Bingos. This will give me a bingo.
Very 2023.
But you know, in terms of like, what could the music industry have done? I don't think it's kind of like you're showing up to wallpaper a house, but you are you think that you're there to like make a stir fry. Like the tools were not there. Like it just was not in the vocabulary at that time.
I mean, she had a very complicated relationship with the music industry anyway. It was via her parents, and you've got a whole different conversation there about responsibility and protection and things like that. But if, hypothetically then, what would have been the right thing to do? Do you know what I mean? Because we still have big pop stars now. We still have people who are struggling with mental health issues or are being pushed to, for example, as a very small point of comparison, artists are saying, look, I'm being pushed to not only create music, not only perform, but to be on every social media platform and produce hashtag content for days. And I'm sort of creatively exhausted, mentally exhausted, physically exhausted. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly the same, but there is that assumption there. I mean, I personally, I use social media because I have to. I personally think social media is the devil because you could, in one way, the one reason I like social media is the convenience of quickly connecting with friends, because for someone like me and someone that would be in a band, like you meet people all over. So it's easy and quick to like, oh, I met you and we hung out at this show and blah, blah, blah. So that's, for connection in that way. But in terms of creating the content, like you just said, I talk to so many young artists that they spend more time creating the content than they do on anything else. And there's nothing left in the tank for making the music or performing or any of that kind of thing. And I think also the disposable nature. I was just talking to Orno, who's the lead singer from Superorganism yesterday. I love her. She's like my little child. And I was saying to her, I'm like, do you think music is more disposable? Because social media, the way it is disposable. Like that's just the bottom line. So you're not creating like a vinyl record or a catalog of music that can be like, you can be like put in the vault, like, Paisley Park style. You're creating something like a story that will be gone in 24 hours. It's a churn.
It's a churn. And I think it's very, very dangerous. I mean, I keep reading these articles, the end to social media. And I'm like, fantastic. Yeah. Because all that time, I know myself, like I'll just catch myself like scrolling through stuff. If artists did not have to do that, I think the quality of the art and the art coming out in general would shoot up.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a quality over quantity conversation. And it sounds obvious that the solution is quality, not quantity. But then if the infrastructure is built around elevating the new rather than the good, and social media does that for sure. It's about constant churn. And the music industry is sort of lockstep with some of these technologies, and so it has an impact, doesn't it? I was reading that the hip hop artist Meek Mill is releasing 4 albums this year, 1 a quarter, so that he can just churn out just tons and tons and tons of content. And sure, if that works for you, if you are Prince and can produce a song a day, why not? But that's not everybody, is it? I mean, it seems to go back to sort of the artist at the center of it all. It sounds kind of obvious from a sort of like even from a blunt business perspective to say, well, the artist is the key asset for all the money that flows in and all the stuff the success that follows. If Britney can't perform, there is no Britney, there is no money, there is no, and we see artists struggling regularly, and it's almost mythologized and sort of celebrated. So, what other than what you said in terms of like, well, the industry just keeps moving and it's grinding on. Why is the artist not recognized as this protect at all costs resource at the center?
I think that's a good question. I was asking that question 30 years ago when I worked at Interscope. I'm like, if all the artists, it's kind of like an Animal Farm vibe, to be fair. You know what I mean? In terms of if all the artists band together and, like one of the things this is a very American thing to say, but in America, like a lot of the artists didn't have health insurance, So I'm like, one of the things that I remember talking to the lead singer of Cracker. What is his name? I can't remember his name. David something.
David Lowery. Yeah.
Yes. I remember talking to him, having many conversations with him about why are we not banding together all these artists and like creating some sort of union that artists can buy into and have insurance and da 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 da. And I think the thing that sucks so bad is, and it's even exasperated right now, I think, is it's that the idea of community, and this is very controversial, the idea of community is trumped by the desire to be famous. You know what I mean? And regardless of what you think, everybody is replaceable. It is true. You know what I mean? The world moves on. And that is the sad thing. I think that people are going to be selfish over being selfless. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, you can see that in not just in modern music or modern fame, but across the years, right? There's the desire to be an artist, and then there's the desire to be famous. And if you're lucky, you get to have both and to be in control of both. But generally, you have to choose one, don't you? And you can see the desire to be famous in all sorts of things. Like I always wonder why you see people who, for example, who are chefs and they win 3 Michelin stars and they become like the best chef in the country, and yet they're willing to move away from that to become a TV superstar. Doing cooking on TV and getting angry at people. You're talking about the bigger picture here that artists are plugging into is at the moment about celebrating high fame and artistry is maybe there's a reality here that we should say that artistry is a step below that.
Yeah, I would 100% artistry is below that. It's fascinating because this is a different thing, but not unrelated. One of my mentors and someone I find hugely inspirational is a guy named Richard Novak. And I may have mentioned him to you before. He is the guy that founded Santa Cruz Skateboards. He was one of the founders of Thrasher magazine. There would be no skateboard industry. There'd be no action sport industry, surfing, BMX, any of that without him. No Dogtown, none of that. But nobody knows who he is because he's never been about fame for himself. He's given millions and millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood to protect the right of women to have choose what they want to do with their bodies. And I've been trying to get a biography for him off the ground for years now to tell his story about like helping to like being part of this group of like 7 guys like O'Neill, Billabong, some other big brands that started the whole action sport surfing BMX scene. And people are like, we don't know his name. They're like, will Tony Hawk be involved? I'm like, he was Tony Hawk's mentor. Yes, Tony Hawk will be involved. But because Rich has not pursued fame, nobody is like, it's hard to get people outside the industry to be interested. And I find it really, really sad because there would be no Tony Hawk. There would be none of this infrastructure. There'd be none of this industry without him. But because he has not pursued fame, that is the thing that is most valued.
So do you think that from the perspective of artists then who are saying, I'm burning out, I'm being asked to do too much. I'm not victim blaming here, but do you think that there's a wider conversation to be had with artists in a bigger picture sense of saying, hey, what do you want here? Do you want to be an artist? Do you want to be famous? And how much you like to help them understand their role within that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, that brings up a good question. And if we go back to like when you and I were coming up, do you remember like selling out was like the thing? Like, I'm not going to sell out.
In the 90s, it was the worst thing, right?
Worst thing you could do. And so I remember having so many conversations with people about that and being like, okay, either you sell out, aka sell a song to a commercial, sign to a big label, and you can actually maybe move out of your mom's basement. Or you can keep on being like, OG and live in your mom's basement. So I think it goes kind of what you're saying about selfless versus selfish. It's like, what does being an artist mean to you? What are those perimeters? And I always say for myself, like, how far do I need to go before I feel like I've exhausted that? Does that make sense? Because you can never, like, I have like 3 regrets in my life and I never want to have regrets for anything again because you can't go back in time, So that's what I think artists have to say. Like, if the reality is, I would say to be a current artist, you need to have social media. That's just the reality of it. And if that's not something that's going to work for you, then this might not be the right game for you. That's just the reality of it. I hate to say that because I hate social media. I think it's, like I said, evil, but that's the reality we're looking at.
It's also an acknowledgement that you can be an artist, but without fame or without significant fame. And you can, if you're satisfied with that and you're willing to sort of build a limited fan base around you that might be able to provide some sort of support. And that's about balance, isn't it? Except we're sort of I have conversations with marketers a lot on this podcast and for music marketers for other reasons, and we're always talking about maximizing. Like, how do you get the biggest possible audience, biggest reach, become big? Well, maybe that's not the only route to satisfaction.
And you know what's fascinating? Again, like I keep bringing up, I had this interview with Orno from Superorganism yesterday, and one of the things, it was from my podcast, Rock and Roll Confidential, and one of the things I asked her, I'm like, 2 songs that like have defined you, and one was a song by Elliott Smith, and one was a song by Alanis Morissette, and you could not have 2 more opposite people from the 90s. Like, I worked with Elliott Smith, and those records were not commercially successful at all. Those were critically acclaimed records, yes. Commercially successful, no. So, and then of course, obviously Alanis, multi-million platinum selling, huge. And so I think that there is something to be said. I think what we've really gotten away from is the idea of creating something for you. This might sound so dumb, but like you and your friends, or something for yourself, even whether that's music or a painting or cookies or whatever. Like, I live in Devon, and it's funny because there is no night to go out here. Like, there's none, Joe. So I said to myself, I'm like, I can either keep on moaning and complaining that there's nowhere even once a year for me to go out and listen and hear the Happy Mondays and Backstreet Boys and dance, or I can do it myself. So like, I'm starting my own night.
Back to your roots.
Yeah, going back, DJ Otter Pop back in the house.
Right.
So, but I think that kind of thing, it's like that. This is where great culture has come from. If you look at hip hop and punk, it's like creating something for you and your friends that speaks to you and your needs. That, I think, has kind of gone out the window for this bigger, better, connecting with more people vibes.
Now, this might be this is a whole different podcast, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, which is, we're in this hyper accelerated culture where this is something I've been thinking about recently, which is how scenes build and grow. You spoke about the sort of the two-tone inflected Californian sort of punkish scene. These pre-internet, pre-social media, these scenes would grow up based in very localized sort of hot houses. So like you've got that the I don't know, the goth scenes across certain places in the UK, or hip hop in New York, or drum and bass in Bristol, whatever. You've got these things that happen, and they sort of hothouse themselves because it's the scene feeding on itself and doing things for itself, and then it explodes, and people go, oh, we've got to be part of this. But of course now, if you make something cool and interesting, it's around the world within 10 minutes, and everybody's, within 3 days, people are making YouTube videos to say, hey, here's how you produce a song that sounds like this cool new thing, and everything is smoothed out immediately and internationalized. We talk about community and marketing all the time now. Build your community. If you build your community around the things that you really care about, you'll find your fans who care about the same things, and you have this self-propagating, supporting community, which, of course, is the ideal, right? That's what people want. So do you think that that's something that perhaps might come back in a sense, because everyone wants it, and they'll find ways to isolate themselves a bit and make this special? The velvet rope thing,
Yeah, I mean, you and I could talk about this forever, because back in the pre-internet, that was what it was all about. Is like this was when Interscope was still an indie label. I had I was really stoked I got to work there at that time, and our whole philosophy was one fan at a time. Because if you build, going back to a couple seconds ago, and we said, if you have that dedicated fan base, if you build one really dedicated fan at a time that's like super into it, that fan's going to be with you for life. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain bands now and certain artists that still like, I'll buy whatever it is. And that's what you want to make. And I feel like that is what is less now. Like, there's less dedicated fans that will buy anything that the artist comes out with. And like, we would literally attack town by town by town. And when we would, when I taught a class at San Francisco State in marketing, and San Francisco, even though it's only 7 by 7 miles, there was, not unlike like a London or New York, there's different boroughs and areas. So it's like, okay, you've conquered the Mission District. Now you conquer hate. Like, you kind of conquer these different areas and make these tribes, and then create, like you said, the scene. And, one thing that I always bring up as an example, really micro example, is my ex-boyfriend. And this is going back literally 30 years at this point, 30 years, 25 years, probably. him and his friends, they started a club called Pop Scene in San Francisco. And this is probably like 1996. And there was probably like 7 of us that went to the first one. And it was the first time any of us had heard British records loud out at a club. You know, none of us had been to England. All of us, like, we dressed as we thought British people dressed. It wasn't fancy dress. Like, we thought, like, literally, I thought by wearing like mod clothing and like white eyeshadow, that was me like looking British, right?
That sounds about right to me.
But it was like the cool thing to do. And the next week there was 14 people, and the next week there was 30 people, and slowly but surely it got to, I think it probably started off as every other week. So it was like, you know, all the cute boys would go, all the cute girls would go in our scene. And there was no internet, but it was just kind of like, what are you going to wear? And like, you know, it still is going to this day. That's the thing that's so nuts about it. It's still going now.
I was in San Francisco in about 2005, and I think I remember seeing a flyer for this when I was there. Just sort of start wrapping things up. Do fans have a responsibility then in terms of, you know, our expectations of stars, or even when I say stars, maybe Britney, or maybe just our favorite indie band that's in danger of doing too much and trying to push too hard?
I think the thing they'll always remember is that celebrities are human. You know, like with Britney, what was fascinating to me is just, you know, and I think we've all been there, but seeing people in their 30s and 40s worship Britney like it was a untouchable, saint-like, angelic figure, when just everything to me, everything is to the opposite of that. Everything is that she's so human, she's so flawed, there's so many things there are questionable. She's not, you know, she's not been perfect in her life. So I think that that's true. But I also think with celebrity comes a certain amount of responsibility. You know, like one of the things that a celebrity that I really look up to, the way she handles her social media, is Shirley Manson from Garbage. Like, she never hides from her opinion or puts it out there, but she also never badmouths anyone on her social media either. And she never, it is personal it is very personal without oversharing, as strange as that. It's such a hard balance to strike, but she does a beautiful job of it. So
yeah, we're sort of renegotiating those relationships all the time between fan. You know, essentially, it's complicated because fans want a closer, more authentic relationship with their artists, and yet they want to deify them a bit. You know, and that's a complicated line to straddle. And I guess the way forward is to shine light on it and to say, right, okay, what does this actually mean? And if artists are starting to say now, no, actually, I'm taking 2 months off because I'm burnt out, and what does that mean? Well, that's the beginning point, right?
Yeah, and I think also like recognizing that, because there is, even though we talk about mental health, at the same time, like, you know, I've been in jobs like, you know, a job that you and I both have worked at, where it's like, I can't deal, like, I need a break, and okay, yeah, take a break. But then like the emails and the text messages and the demands don't stop. Just, you know, I think people like to play mouth service to mental health break, but they don't actually follow through on that. And just stupid things like not stupid, but simple things like being out in nature, or like connecting with a friend that you've like on the phone, or dare I say in real life, like simple things like that can make you go, oh my gosh, like this is what life's about. I do think the social media is like a double-edged sword. Like I do think that is, it just adds this whole other, and it isn't just, if there's just one social media platform, the fact that there's like 20 literally that these kids have to be utilizing, and just the amount of content and the engagement and the attention span, all that stuff, really, it's replacing the music in a lot of ways, which I think is really, really sad. And also the fact there's so many internet, like TikTok celebrities and artists, that to me is like, is that really artistry? And I think the more that you see that as normality, the more that becomes okay as the way forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it does seem like there's a sort of question, like to some of the people who are becoming famous, is that, well, obviously, is your primary ambition to be a musician or and an artist, or is it to be famous and making music is a tool that you are using in your quest for fame?
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying that there is clearly a difference there between someone who their passion is music and they're creating music that they and their friends care about and then it rolls from there, as opposed to my passion is virality and increasing my follower count.
Yeah.
And using music to as leverage to do that. And I'm not casting any judgment on those people per se, but it is a very different. The outcome of that music that's made for that purpose is very different to music that is made for music.
I agree. I mean, I think the thing is too, and again, like different strokes for different folks, but it is it's a talent to be able to play an instrument. And I think that that's also something that the ability to play an instrument in punk rock obviously created. You don't have to be a virtuoso to play. That's fantastic, But at the same time, I think that idea of like using music to express something that nothing else can express in that same way, that is in danger of being usurped by fame at all costs. And that's probably a different podcast to talk about that. So sorry.
We'll have to get you back to talk about that one. But before I let you go, one final question, which is, if you could only pick one piece of music, if you could only listen to one song or one album, you could one or the other.
Okay.
What would it be? And that's all you can have then forever.
Ooh. Okay, this is going to be such a controversial choice. Are you ready for it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Phil Collins, No Jacket Required.
No way. I did. I did not see that coming. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Well, it'd probably be different tomorrow if you asked me, but that record, like, I love that record. Like, there's something for every occasion on that record. There's like, the cardio track with Susu Studio. There's like this super emo, like Inside Out. There's, there's like a Sting guest spot on that. And like it has significance for me because it reminds me of being a kid in Santa Cruz, but it also reminds me of meeting my husband because I dated so many, okay, sorry, I'm kind of, I'm digressing. I'm digressing a bit. I'm good friends with Susanna Hoffs from the Bangles, and she keeps telling me, she's like, you need to stop writing biographies about other people, and you need to write a book about your dating experiences. Okay. Now this was spurned on by her because I was telling her about how I once accidentally had sex with a clown, an actual clown. Okay.
Okay, again, I'm going to say the word accidentally is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
I know.
It's this tiny anecdote you just decided to drop.
I know, again, hashtag on trend. So one of the things I'd say, like when things were starting to get a little serious with guys, I'd be like, listen, I'm like,
can you juggle? Do you have a red nose?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I would say, when things were getting a little intimate, I would be like, I'm just going to put on some music, and I'd throw on Phil Collins, No Jacket Required. And like most guys would be like, oh, hells no. You know what I mean? Like,
right. So that was the ultimate test.
Yeah, that was a test. Yeah, that was a test. And for most people, the mood was like, this was a mood killer.
But the clown got out the modeling balloons, and you just
let me tell you, a hot dog was created. No, my husband. What happened is my now husband, we first started dating. We were shopping and we were having coffee, and I was like telling him how much I love Phil Collins. I'm like, oh, I need to get No Jacket Required on vinyl. I had it in America. I don't know why I don't have it here. And he's like, oh, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. And he was gone for a really long time. I'm like, God, someone's having stomach upset. And he came back and he had a copy of it in his hands. He'd gone across to the record store across the way, and like they'd had a used copy, and he brought it to me. And
at that point, you knew.
I'm just like, yeah, well, this is a keeper. And like even last weekend at the pub, he put Inside Out on the jukebox for me.
Wow, what a guy.
I know. And this is a man that, like, when we first started dating, our very first date, he's like, did you ever work with Snoop Dogg? I'm like, well, I've talked to him on the phone, but not worked with him. And then my husband goes, have you ever worked with Nate Dogg? I'm like, no. Anyone from the Dog Pound? I said, no. And he's like, okay, I don't care then, because my husband's super into like the old school hip hop. He didn't care. And he still will put Phil Collins on for me. No, is that not a
wow?
That's a good man.
Well, I mean, what a point to finish the podcast.
What did you think? I mean, I did think of Hatful of Hollow or Meet Is Murdered by the Smiths. I did think Fleetwood Mac or the Doobie Brothers.
Don't wind it back now. I think you should. No. I think you should stick with that.
Dude, I have no shame. I'm a Phil Collins.
I can tell. I think that is absolutely clear, Jen.
I mean, I think he's, not now, but like probably like mid 80s, like balding Phil in the khakis. Ooh, break some of that off. Throw it over here.
Yeah, he had a weird energy, didn't he? But
yeah, tasty vittles.
Yeah. So,
we talk again soon.
It's clear that we have to get you back on the podcast to talk a little bit more about your weird celebrity crushes. Jen, look, I know you have better things to do than talk to me. So
no. You're always the best part of my day.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jen. Thank you very much for joining us.
You are wonderful. I love you to bits, and can't wait to talk again.
So there you go. If you found that useful or interesting or even just mildly entertaining, please share this podcast on with someone else who you think will find one of those things up their street. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, please do. It's joe@musically.com. That's Joe, Joe, @musically.com. We also have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up a soupçon of the best analysis, news, marketing insights, skills, and so on from Music Ally's services, and chops it up, shoves it in an email, and sends it out to you every Friday. So sign up and impress your boss, your neighbors, and your friends. Links to that and to all the stuff we mentioned in the interview are in the description next to the podcast, as always. So that's it from me. I've been Joe Sparrow. This has been Music Ally Focus, and see you next time.